William Flint Marco Baker was a New York criminal who escaped prison and sought refuge in an atomic testing site. He jumped into an experimental reactor's steam system where it exploded, bombarding him with a massive dose of radiation. His body then bonded with sand, and he gained extraordinary superpowers.
So, what are some of Sandman's strengths and weaknesses? Let's start with the strengths. First, we have superhuman strength. Second, we have shape shifting abilities with the sand. Third, projectiles can pass completely through him. Fourth, he is invincible to most physical attacks. And last, he can gain and absorb sand to turn into muscle. Weaknesses? He is very vulnerable to water, especially attacks by water, and heat. Heat can turn his body into glass.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about how biology connects to Sandman. After the explosion, Sandman's body bonded with the radioactive sand, changing his molecular structure into sand. This altered his DNA, changing his body and functionality. Additionally, it altered him to become more similar to the small, compact structure of sand, allowing Sandman to manipulate his own body. This demonstrates emergent properties as Sandman is able to control the sand as it is his own body. Working together, the sand particles all work as a whole unit to accomplish tasks a single grain of sand couldn't do on its own. For example, there is not a single grain of sand that controls the rest. It is his own body working together to create a whole unit that accomplishes a task on its own. This property gives Sandman his superhuman strength.
Now moving on to Sandman's connection to exercise science, I'll first analyze the comparisons of Sandman to the human body. Starting with the similarities, while Sandman alters his muscular composition into sand, he still maintains the properties of muscle contractility, elasticity, and extensibility. For example, Sandman can extend or shrink his grain particles to form whatever shape he desires, further demonstrating the property of extensibility. Sandman also exemplifies elasticity as he maintains the ability to change and adapt to different scenarios, much like how humans change their body to adapt to their surroundings. However, Sandman is very different from humans in that he has no internal organs yet can still move without muscles. Instead of contracting muscles, Sandman contracts his grains to form a rigid and close-packed state to strike Spider-Man with an intense force. Now looking at Sandman in action, we'll be analyzing a fighting scene between Spider-Man and Sandman. In the clip, Sandman contracts his sand particles, or in other words, activates his tension-generating sites to keep Spider-Man's hand inside Sandman's body. Now, in relation to how humans use motor neurons to send electrical signals to their muscles, Sandman uses motor neurons to send signals to his soul molecules, which the other sand particles can bind to. Now for the chemistry aspect of Sandman. In the movie, the scientists at the atomic testing site started the molecularization of the sand, meaning they were converting it to molecular form, which would be silicon dioxide. Sandman also underwent this molecularization process. In their molecular forms, Sandman's molecules and the sand bonded through covalent bonding, where they share electrons. Although this process would render Sandman's cells inhuman, it's assumed that the radiation caused mutations that allow Sandman to control his body, even with this new molecular makeup. Sandman also shapes and manipulates sand to alter its density, simulating changes between the three states of matter. In liquid form, Spider-Man's fist travels straight through Sandman when he punches him. Simulating solid, Sandman's fist hardens so that he can punch Spider-Man. The sand particles come closer together and more compact, similar to atoms in a solid state. In gaseous form, whenever Sandman wants to fly anywhere, he lets himself blow away with the wind. In this state, his sand particles are far away from each other, similar to atoms in a gaseous form.
Now I'm going to talk about the connections of physics to Sandman's abilities. In the movie Spider-Man 3, Sandman punches through part of a concrete wall in an attempt to hit Spider-Man. Let's watch the clip now. So, we were curious, how much force can Sandman exert with his sand fist? It's obviously much more forceful than the average human's punch because we can't break through concrete. We use the equation for force, which is force equals mass times acceleration. The mass of the concrete wall is 2,300 kilograms per cubic meter, and Sandman punched through about 2 meters of concrete. The acceleration of an Olympic boxer's fist during a punch is about 8.9 meters per second. So, plugging in these numbers into the force equation, you get 41,000 newtons. This is 28 times more force than the average human's punch, which means Sandman's molecular structure gives him super strength.
So for computer science connections to Sandman, or more specifically the visual effects of Sandman, there were several approaches taken to simulate the movement of the individual grains of sand. The first one was particle simulation, and this was achieved by a simulation engine called SphereSim. SphereSim caught falling sand particles and implemented a blend of simulation equations to make the movement of sand as realistic as possible. There was also gas simulation, which was used to generate dust roiling above the sand pile. Similarly, a fluid simulator was used to move Sandman when he transformed himself into a dust cloud. And lastly, RenderMan plugins were used to vary the look of the sand. It made it so that each sand particle will have a unique appearance.
The four main concepts seen in most Sandman scenes include creating a base figure for all the still sand and saving a spot for the location with any erosion or moving sand, animating the moving sand for the base figure, rendering a low-resolution grain-to-grain simulation for the scene, finalizing any tweaks and adjustments to create the final high-resolution render of the scene. Scott Stodick, the lead visual effects supervisor for Spider-Man 3, and his team used procedural decomposition or breaking down the sand particle system into smaller, more manageable parts to solve the problem. The sand particles had to transfer data through several series of solvers. Among them were avalanching, cascading, blowing in collision, and targeted-driven shape movement.